Well, hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Sam. I am a student of the Bible. I am a pastor, and I am a writer, and my training involves biblical studies, theology, and biblical languages. So I get asked the question often as a pastor, what are my thoughts? What's my experience? What do I think about the King James version of the Bible? And so I actually have a lot of thoughts about it. I shared a little bit in a video that I did before, but yeah, so what I don't want to do in this video is I don't want to give you a history of the King James Bible. I think there's a lot of videos on YouTube about that. The translation of it, the 15 rules that King James used in their translation, all that kind of stuff. You can search YouTube, find all that. There's really good explanations of that. I will say this, be careful when you watch videos about the King James Bible. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And a lot of conspiracy theory stuff. So just use discernment watching these videos. But there's some pretty good trusted sources on the King James Bible. In fact, there's a couple Bible scholars, and there's a textual scholar named Mark Ward. He has devoted a lot of his life towards the King James Bible. I think he went to Bob Jones University, was a King James only guy. Now he's not that anymore, and he talks a lot about that whole deal. So you can search his stuff up. He can give you a good history of what the King James Bible history is and how it came about and all that kind of stuff. What I want to do in this video is tell you my history with the King James Bible, the King James Version, and then give you my this is my thoughts on it. This is purely my opinion. Okay. First, my history with it. I grew up. My history with the King James Version goes all the way back till I was 2-3 years old. Okay, so I grew up at an independent fundamentalist Baptist church in California, and it was a King James only church. So that's all we were ever told was authoritative Bible-wise. Every other version of the Bible was a corruption of God's holy word. And the King James Bible was it. It was the Bible. It is God's word. And that's all that there is. Everything else is corrupt. Even New King James was corrupt. And I thought, this is kind of weird. Isn't it the same thing, but just updated? But they're like, no, that's, no good. So ever since I was little, that was the church that I went to all the way up through graduation from high school. And then a part of that church, we had this thing called the Awana program. Now, if you are a former fundee or whatever, you'll know the Awana program. And this was how do I explain the Awana program? Like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts for church kids. And you would have to have these little books. You had vests and shirts and all that kind of stuff, and earn badges for memorizing verses. And so when I was going through it, it was all King James. And so I was well versed in the King James Bible, memorizing. I was locked and ready with King James verses, ready to go. I went all the way up through 6th grade in the Awana program. I earned every trophy. I went through every book. I memorized every verse. I had this stuff down. I was the King James only 6th grader. And it was crazy. It wasn't until I graduated high school. And then, by the way, I also went to a Christian school that was attached to that church. And guess what they taught us in Bible classes? The King James Bible. So I graduated from high school, and I went to a place called William Jessup University. Actually, it was called San Jose Christian College back then. But it's called William Jessup University now. And I walked into a Life of Christ class, and part of the recommended books we had to buy and reading, all that kind of stuff, was a New Oxford Annotated Bible College Edition, and it was the NRSV. And we had to use that Bible for our classes. And I was like, why can't I just use my Bible? I have the Bible. What's the NRSV? And my pastor was like, no, NRSV is no good, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I had to use it for the class. I had to quote from it. And for the first time, I was reading the Bible in a way that I actually understood what the words meant. I actually understood what I was reading, and it was was easier to kind of dissect what was going on there. And we then going forward from there in undergrad, learning about textual criticism, that kind of stuff in these classes. I transferred schools across the country and finished my undergrad. Went through Greek, all that kind of Hebrew, all that kind of stuff, and I began to realize through all of that why there's such a big difference. Before I just thought it was like people, editing the Bible however they wanted to. I didn't realize there was source text behind them. And so once I understood source texts, and then went through, seminary, all that kind of stuff, I realized, there's a big difference between the King James Bible and other Bibles, and it has to do with the source texts, not just the fact that people didn't like these and thous. And so that set me on a different path and a different journey, and I talked about that before. But so that's my history with the King James Bible. I was in a King James only church for 18 years of my life, before I even had any kind of real exposure to any other version outside of the King James Version. So I would say I'm pretty well versed in this Bible. I walked away from it pretty hard during my college years and after, and I put this Bible away on my shelf. And I think this past Christmas is the first time in, when would that have been? That would have been 2001 or 2. So it would have been 20 years, more than 20 years, that I had not even picked this up to look at it. And so I picked it up over Christmas. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go back to it, just give it a shot, and I'm gonna read it. I've kind of gotten over my PTSD, my growing up, and I'm just gonna, to read it devotionally, and it was really cool because it was kind of like when I was a kid and reading back through it. So I've been reading devotionally the King James Bible lately in my own personal time. I don't use it to study, all that kind of stuff. I just use it devotionally. So what are my thoughts on it? So this is my King James Bible from my childhood, from being a kid. See, it's got my name written on right there. My parents got this for me when I was, I want to say 5th or 6th grade. And it's like real leather. It was like, this was cool. It was expensive. And it was a Scofield Reference Bible. If you don't know about that, just Google it. It's got all kinds of notes in here that really they led me kind of in a weird place for a little bit of my life. But anyway, but yeah, this was my Bible that I had all the way through high school and then part of college, and I put it away because I realized other things. But so what are my thoughts on the King James Bible? Well, a couple. Number one, when I look at Bible translations, one of the first things I look at is accessibility. So as I'm reading it, and especially now as a teacher, as someone who teaches, the scriptures and that kind of stuff, I'm looking for a translation that's accessible for people. And so even today, so I'm 43, I'm going to be 44 here this summer, but even today at the age I'm at, with my experience with the language, I still struggle pretty hardcore with some of the stuff in the King James Version, because we just don't talk like that in our world. We don't use some of these words. There's some words here that were like, Mark Ward calls them false friends, but they're just words that I have to go look up to go, what does that even mean? Because we just don't use them in our language anymore. They're just outdated, old English, old way of thinking about things, old way of using words and language. And so when I look at a translation, I want the translation to be accessible, number one. Number two, I want the translation to be accurate. And so one of the things that I like about the King James Bible is it's very accurate to its source text. Now, that brings up a different question. The King James Bible is based off of the source text in Greek of the Textus Receptus, which is the Erasmus translation of the Greek Bible. And it was revised a few times, but when King James authorized the King James Bible to be done, he wanted to update the Bishop's Bible. That's from that history. And they were going to go back and use the source text of the Textus Receptus. And that's that source text. And in 1611, that's what they did. And they used that one. And what ended up happening was that became the standard for a long time, and that was how the source text that everyone used, until we found other source texts that were earlier, that seemed to be more, seemed to be closer to the original, and everybody kind of went, wait a second. There's stuff missing in these earlier source texts that seem to be maybe added in over time. And so as I went through school, I had to make a decision on what source texts I felt more comfortable with using and which source texts I felt were more accurate. And I picked the critical texts. The Nestle Aland text, I think, is what we use for Greek. And that was the one that I had used for all the way through college, through seminary. It's one I still use today. I do use the TR every once in a while, and just kind of comparing the two. And but I think it's just like a comfortability and a choice thing. Not one is like way better than the other. They're very similar to each other. So here's the deal. I think that people who blow up that conversation and say, no, the TR is the authorized Bible. No, the source. Or no, it's the critical text is the source. Oh, the majority text is the Bible. Like, I just think that's a really weird take, because I think they're so close, like 99% pretty close to the same. You got a few places here and there where they're different, majorly different, and then you got a bunch of minor differences all the way through it. The major differences are like the longer ending of Mark. I think it's the end of John 7, and then the beginning of John 8 isn't in the critical text. And there's arguments back and forth on whether it should be, whether it shouldn't be. Did a scribe miss it? Did they add it in later? Where did it go? All that kind of stuff. And so here's the deal. The way I look at this now is that I think that we have an abundance of amazing English translations. There are some that I don't favor, and I've talked about those ad nauseum. And there's some that I'm not really accustomed to. And there are some that I'm kind of like, and the reason I'm like, is because there's just easier transmissible, like the language is more accessible. And so, while I think this is a good translation, I think it is just, the accessibility of it to modern day English readers, is difficult. And so I would say, it's not that I wouldn't recommend this. It's not, what I would say is that if you're not accustomed to the King James Bible already, this would not be my first choice for you to pick out and read. You're going to be very frustrated if you've never experienced the King James Bible before. Now, one of the beautiful things about the King James Bible is that the King James Bible's language, although it is not accessible, although it is difficult, if you are a little more accustomed to that, it makes for a beautiful devotional Bible. I love reading this. And I have another one at home that's smaller than this that I read for my devotional time. But I love it for that because, number one, I grew up with it, and so it feels kind of like home. But also because the language just feels so royal, I guess is the word. Like it feels so other than what I normally use. And so it feels a little bit more like, there's an experience going on, especially if you read it out loud. I read a portion of it to my kids, and they were like, "What are you reading?" I said, "It's the Bible." And they're like, "Really? It's not the Bible we heard." It's because they've grown up with NIV and NLT and all that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, there's a beauty in the language. It's very poetic, language kind of a thing. So, if you are accustomed to this kind of language, if you like Shakespeare, if you like reading old books, if you're into reading things like the Church Fathers and that kind of stuff, and this will be very familiar to that kind of language, that the way it's translated. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the King James Version. I don't tell people not to. I just kind of tell them, hey, this is what it's not very accessible language-wise. Might be a difficult read if you're not used to it. And you need to know that there are parts of the critical text that would say that's not in it, but the King James Bible has it in there. Now, for those people who are like, no, King James only, this is the only Bible, I would just say, there's some homework to be done. on text variants, on all kinds of different things. There's just some homework to be done. And I would encourage you to do that homework and not have a bias as you do that. And just as I don't have a bias walking into the Textus Receptus and going, hey, you know what, this might actually have been in there and it got left out or whatever. So if we have that kind of a charitable approach, I think we're all better off for it. And we live in a day and age where we have amazing amounts of English translations of the Bible. We're kind of lucky that way. So anyway, yeah, hopefully this was fun, and thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.